But it got to a point where I was just like, this is really weird. And this isn't the wrestling that I love. And I think in that time I was like, I'm just gonna see what happens if I don't watch everything. Like, what can I truly miss in that time? And then it just became normal to go, oh, a friend asked me to do this on Saturday. Oh, SmackDown's on. I can still leave and I can still catch up on what I need to catch up on. The power of the internet kind of lets you watch a show without watching a show. So I just learned to tell myself sometimes it's okay to miss wrestling. And I've never loved it more in that aspect because the pressure is off of having to watch everything. It's now just like, what is gravitating my interest to watch something?
What's going on, guys? It's your boy, Tom Took Fresh, and stand back for another interview. This time, I'm joined by the one and only Josh Robinson from Love Wrestling. So welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate you kindly asking for me to be on.
So if we take this back, Josh, where do you first discover wrestling as a fan?
So as a fan, I've been watching wrestling now. So while I have an older brother who's 7 years older than me, so there is a little bit of an age gap with me and my brother. He was watching wrestling with my dad in like the Monday Night War era and stuff like that. I was too young to remember that kind of side of wrestling. He did tell me I used to love it then, but the first like memories I have of wrestling is the Invasion era, the Alliance, all that kind of stuff in 2001. So quite a while ago now. And I just that's my first kind of memories with wrestling is that time, which a lot of people look at in wrestling as like a weird time because WCW had come to an end and the Invasion was kind of what it was. Looking back on it, it's like, what is that? But yeah, that's where I first kind of fell in love with wrestling. And then it's just, I've never taken a break since. Crazy enough as it sounds.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
never.
That's really cool to hear. So you talked about there not having being told you loved wrestling back then, but not remembering you loved wrestling. So what is, do you remember the specific moment that you started your own fandom? I know you talked about the Invasion, but was there a specific moment that you was like, okay, I'm a wrestling fan now?
I don't know if it was this. This is a moment I always think of. And when people have asked me that question before, it's always a moment I've kind of gone into my brain and been like, this is the moment I remember sitting on my couch watching. Again, I don't know if it was this moment that kind of pulled me in, but it's certainly a moment I remember. It's the night after WrestleMania 18. Triple H has just become the undisputed champion. He beat Chris Jericho. And there was a main event on the Raw between Jericho, Triple H, and Stephanie McMahon for the undisputed championship. I know, a very weird match to kind of pinpoint, but I can remember sitting on my couch as a kid. I would have been 7 at the time, 7 or 8 years old at the time. And I can just remember sitting there and being like, this is cool. Like, wrestling is really weird. Like, there's just this triple threat match with like Stephanie McMahon going for the world championship. I just remember that. So that's always a moment. Again, obviously there was stuff before that I can kind of remember watching, but that is always the moment that I'm like, I can vividly right now picture myself sitting down watching that. So yeah, very weird match, I know.
That's very cool to hear though, because it's different and not always the origin story we get. So that's very cool. When you talked about your introduction to wrestling being partial intergender, that is very hard to say. Partial intergender match sort of thing. But obviously, in nowadays, unless basically for the bigger promotions, you don't really see intergender wrestling anymore, right? So,
no, you don't.
as someone you were telling me off camera, that's a big supporter and contributor to women's wrestling. Do you think intergender wrestling has a place in current wrestling, or is it something that you're like, this could be left alone, leave it to the video games sort of thing?
It's interesting. It's always a topic of discussion with a lot of people, like whether they're for it or against it. I don't really float in either territory. I hate to be that person that kind of floats in the middle, but I truly think there is a way to do it in the year 2023, but you have to be very careful with how you do it, because it's a very different world we live in than in 2002 or 2001, 2000, when all this kind of stuff was pretty common, intergender wrestling. And again, it's not like it doesn't happen now. It does happen, but in the bigger promotions, it's a very fine line that you have to kind of draw. And I don't know where the line is. That's the kind of, no, I wouldn't say problem with it, but where my kind of head is at is like, where is the line? What can you do? What can't you do? It's interesting. So I'm kind of neutral towards it. I don't have a for or against with it. If that, I don't mean to be a cop-out answer, but
I know what you mean, though. I would say the last time we saw intergender wrestling in WWE, I don't know if this counts, you'll be able to tell me, was Ronda Rousey, Kurt Angle
yeah,
versus Triple H and Stephanie. And there's that moment in the match where Triple H is in the corner and Ronda Rousey's basically punching him quite a bit. What is your thoughts on something like that? Because obviously we know Ronda's got a legitimate background and things like that. Because we know she could beat him up in real life, I'll put it that way. Do you think that adds to it, or is it the sort of thing that's like, I know what I'm trying to say. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I think it can be done. I think the best way to go with something like that is maybe it's done in small increments, and I think it's situation based. Something like that works. But then where does the line get drawn of like, if Triple H fights back? Do you know what I mean? Like, where does the line get drawn in that, and how much can you do and how much can't you do? Maybe it is a little bit of wrestling is wrestling. I think all wrestling fans, at least the way we consume wrestling, we all know what wrestling is. We all know, you know, it's a show and dance and all that kind of stuff. And while we can get past that, I don't know if an 8-year-old kid can get past that. You know what I mean? Like, we got to remember,
or like someone's grandma nowadays, sort of thing.
Exactly.
Like if they saw it for the first time.
So we all kind of live on the internet and live on wrestling, be like, let's have wrestling be cool and stuff like this. But we were also 8-year-old kids at a time. And yes, wrestling was different back then, but it's a very different world that we live in now. So again, I think it can be, I think it can be done. Should it be done is another question. I really honestly don't know. I don't have the answer for it, but I think in small increments, in situations like the Rousey situation, well, clearly it did work. So it's just, again, where is the line?
I don't know why we went on that tangent, and I do apologize.
Oh, so like, no, please tangent away.
So you talked about us consuming wrestling. Being someone that is based in Australia, how did you consume wrestling as a kid, and how do you currently consume wrestling? Where is your current fandom? How do you consume it with the time difference, etc.?
Yeah, so listen, you guys in the UK, you guys have wrestling in the middle of the night, so it's awful. We get it at a relatively good time. We get it in the morning, so around about 10 a.m. is when wrestling airs for most of the year. It kind of varies with daylight saving and stuff like that. But between like 10 and midday is where wrestling is mainly live, if it's airing live in the States. So that I can't say is the worst thing. It's obviously weekdays, and sometimes I just can't watch live a lot of the time because I have a job and I'm an adult and have to do adult things. But for the most part, like, so for example, like Fridays, SmackDown will air on a Saturday morning here. So that's perfect for me. I'm home on a Saturday morning. So, and then Raw airs on a Tuesday morning because of the time difference. We're like, you know, in the future, way ahead. So
Dynamite,
yeah, like
on a
wrestling,
Thursday, etc., right?
Yeah, exactly. So if I'm home and I can watch wrestling live, by all means, I'll watch it live. But usually I'm watching on a delay just because I'm an adult and I have responsibilities, unfortunately, to not be home on a 10 a.m. on a Tuesday to watch Raw. But I always watch it. You know, I love wrestling, and I've probably never been more in love with wrestling because I have a much healthier relationship with wrestling now. I used to get on that. I think especially when like AEW and stuff was starting, especially now, there's so much wrestling to consume. And sometimes I got in that kind of way of like, I have to watch everything. And I was kind of losing my love for wrestling a little bit, to be completely honest, because there was just so much. And I was like, oh my God, FOMO, I'm going to miss out and all that kind of stuff. But now I'm kind of in the zone of just like, it's okay to miss wrestling sometimes. It's all right if I don't watch every show.
Do you remember the moment that clicked and you was like, it's okay to not have seen. I'll pick out an obscure match. This match from a Japanese promotion or
Mm,
something that I can't think of the name of right now.
mm, it was honestly during COVID because wrestling was so, let's just call it what it was. Wrestling was weird in
Yeah,
2020. There
yeah.
was no crowd. And for a little while, I was like, this is cool. There's no crowd. We're kind of learning there's different ways to kind of get yourself, quote unquote, over and stuff like that during this time. But it got to a point where I was just like, this is really weird. And this isn't the wrestling that I love. And I think in that time, I was like, I'm just gonna see what happens if I don't watch everything. Like, what can I truly miss in that time? And then it just became normal to go, oh, a friend asked me to do this on Saturday. Oh, SmackDown's on. I can still leave and I can still catch up on what I need to catch up on. The power of the internet kind of lets you watch a show without watching a show. So I just learned to tell myself sometimes it's okay to miss wrestling. And I've never loved it more in that aspect because the pressure is off of having to watch everything. It's now just like, what is gravitating my interest to watch something?
So that's very cool to hear. And a nice segue there is you brought up you watch what's gravitating your interest. So what is the show that you're like, okay, no matter what goes on in my week at the moment, at time of recording in June 2023, I have to sit and watch this show this week.
I think more so now is that I always, you know, when you get in weird zones in your life where you're just like, this is what I do on a Tuesday night. Like, I work every Tuesday. So I look forward to coming home on a Tuesday night and watching Raw. Yes, it's on a delay. Now, is Raw the best wrestling program that there is in the world? Absolutely not. But everything has flaws. But it's just something I look forward to every Tuesday and I just enjoy it. I enjoy watching Raw. So Raw is always something that I watch and I never miss pay-per-views. Pay-per-views are all premium live events, whatever you want to call them. Both on the WWE side and I watch most AEW pay-per-views as well. So I love sitting down and watching a pay-per-view though, because I don't know, it's just always that's something I look forward to watching live, I think. But I definitely prefer to watch like wrestling television shows like Raw, SmackDowns, Dynamites, all that on a delay. I like to be able to fast forward a few things that I'm just not interested in.
Yeah, yeah.
But pay-per-views is something that I like, okay, I have to watch it at 9:30 this time, and this is when I'm going to watch it and I'm going to enjoy it.
So what is the show currently that you're like, because you brought up earlier, your friend maybe asking you to do something on a specific day and you being like, it's okay to miss out. What is the show that you're like, I'm not going to miss this. I want to watch it even if it's on delay. I want to pick.
Probably Raw. Probably Raw is the one that I never really, weirdly enough, I know it sounds weird, but I think I'm so used to the format that Raw is in that it's kind of, it's just a familiar feeling. So it's just a very like comfortable feeling when I watch Raw. SmackDown is hit or miss for me. Dynamite is something that I go in and out of AEW so much. Like sometimes I'm really into it. Sometimes I really don't like it. And then there's just times in the middle where I'm like, I'll catch what I want to catch. But to be honest, Raw gives me the most, it whets my appetite the most with the amount of women that are featured usually on Raw. SmackDown gets very rushed. AEW is what it is with its women's stuff. So Raw is really the one that, Raw is really the one that gives me the most.
Enough in AEW,
nowhere near
personally.
enough. No, there's not. And so many people like to kind of arc their back up at that and be like, but they did this. And I'm like, no, but it when you watch it, wrestling, there's no one size fits all with wrestling. Wrestling is about how it makes you feel. And I think we want to so much just feel a certain way when we watch wrestling. I don't get that vibe, especially with the women on AEW. And that's not because they're talented. It's just the opportunities are very different. Where Raw, I'm not saying that Raw is perfect. It's not. But WWE as a whole present their women as bigger deals. So that's where I kind of gravitate towards.
I understand. Before we get into your love of women's wrestling, I am very curious to know what you think about this. With the fact that you make sure that you watch Raw every week, do you reckon that's something that's ingrained in you because that was part of your childhood? Or do you reckon, or I know what I'm trying. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
you're.
it's
I want to
it's
say
almost
stuck in
nostalgic.
a. I want to say
Mm.
stuck in a routine, but like because it's part of your routine, is do you reckon it's just something you're used to?
Yeah, it's very fair to probably put that question towards me because I think I think as grown adults, sometimes we're just searching for feeling like a kid again. We just want to feel like a kid where nothing matters. And I think Raw is that familiar, comfortable feeling that I get with wrestling that is just like, oh, I remember watching Raw as a kid and just feeling a certain type of way. So yeah, it probably is ingrained in me a little bit, but um, some people might call that just being naive to what is good and what isn't good. But hey, it's what I enjoy. So that's
Oh,
really all that
definitely. And
matters.
I didn't mean to sort of put you
Oh, no,
down
no,
on
no.
that question.
No.
No, definitely. I definitely agree with you on that one.
Mm.
So you talked about there, obviously being a lover of women's wrestling. How did that come about then? How did you start
Oh.
enjoying women's wrestling and stuff like that? And sort of the way I'll phrase it is like, why are you such a big supporter of women's wrestling without? I know what I'm trying to say. Sorry, sorry about that.
You're all good. I think for me with women,
Uh,
I always gravitate towards when I watch movies, when I watch anything like that, when I watch anything, I'm gravitated towards like the underdog story. There's always that good feeling you get when you're just like, this is the underdog story. I want to see something rise from the bottom and rise to the top. And I think with women, they've always been looked at, especially I grew up in that era of like Trish and Lita. And while we look back upon that now and we're like, they were so great. You watch Raw week to week in 2002, 3, 4, and so on, it's not like they were presented as big deals. They were still given 3-minute matches, and we just focus on the big things that happened during that time. So I
the
think
main event
I've
in Raw,
always just
for
kind of,
example.
yeah, exactly. We focus on that, and as we should. Well, my God, it was an amazing feat that they got to main event Raw in a time where women weren't getting to do that. But that being said, I think I've always kind of rooted for women to do really well because for so long they were pushed down to the bottom, and there was so much talent across all of that era that you're just like, oh my God, if they just got given the same opportunities as these guys, they would be the biggest stars in the industry, but it just didn't happen that way. And because it took so long for that fight, I mean, when you think about it, it is still fairly recently that this all kind of happened in the grand scheme of things. So it is, I've just always kind of gravitated towards seeing, I just wanted more. And I knew that there was more that women could do. And just, I've always been raised that way. I was raised in an environment where women can succeed. So I don't
Hmm.
understand why that can't translate to sport and entertainment and all that kind of stuff. It was an organic rise that it took a long time. Trust me. There was a lot of moments where I was like, why do I like this? Why am I watching this? But yeah, I've just always kind of gone towards that because it's just, to me, it's the ultimate underdog story in wrestling.
Hmm. I've never thought of it that way, but that's a very good way of looking at it, if I'm being totally honest. So I
Mm.
know you do a show on Love Wrestling where you spotlight women from specific eras. Could you please remind me of the name of that show?
Yeah, it's the legacy of.
The Legacy of, correct. Uh,
Mm.
so when it comes to that, when it comes to Love Wrestling Festival, actually we'll go deeper. When did you first discover like wrestling content creation and stuff like that? And when was this something that you were like, I want to give this a try?
So it started, I have a really, I guess, probably pretty vanilla story when it comes to starting wrestling content creation. So I started, I live in a relatively small town, so there's not a lot of people around me that watch wrestling. And I was like, man, I would love to just share my thoughts on wrestling, even if it's just into the void. You know what I mean? Just
Mm,
into the atmosphere, into the world. And I was like, oh my God, what is this wrestling podcast thing? So this was back in July of 2018. And I was like, let's just start a wrestling podcast. And I was like, how do I do that? Let's look up how to start a podcast. And I basically had like my 7-year-old ancient MacBook, and I was like, I'm going to start a wrestling podcast and just see what happens. I had a Guitar Hero microphone that I plugged into
ooh,
my my MacBook and I was like, this will do. Let's see if this works. And I just started doing a wrestling podcast. And obviously when you start something with no traction, I had no even kind of sphere of what wrestling Twitter was or anything like that. I had an account, but like there was no one following me. I was just kind of tweeting to tweet. Like there was nothing. There was nothing there to say that anyone would be paying any kind of attention. So I was doing a wrestling podcast for a few months. And then you just get in different circles of wrestling Twitter and you start talking to people and that person starts paying attention to what you do. And then slowly and surely you start getting in the kind of zone of things and you're like, oh, this person does this. And oh my God, there's so many wrestling podcasts and wrestling people making videos and, the list goes on and on and on. So that's where it all kind of started for me, was just like a very small wrestling podcast that kind of grew into a small wrestling show, but a somewhat successful show. And I was just at that time in my life, 5-6 years ago, I was able to give it like 100% of my time, 100% of my energy. So I just put everything I could into like doing this and just seeing if I had a voice or a place in the wrestling Twitter atmosphere. And, all these years later, and I'm not saying I'm a big deal at all because I'm not, but like people know who I am and that's kind of cool. So it just kind of expanded from the podcast to doing video work, to doing work with Fightful and work with Love Wrestling and then Twitch streaming and all that kind of stuff. And now I'm just kind of in my own little zone and doing what I can to still contribute.
And doing very well at it, I might add as well. And one of the nicest creators on this thing, in this space as well.
Thank you.
So you talked about there, you started your podcast 5-6 years ago, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll put it this way, it always sounds cheesy when I ask this question, but like, if you knew what you know now about content creation when you was first starting your podcast, how do you think your podcast would be different, etc.?
Oh my God. I don't think even once I've gone back and gone through my archives of files and files of stuff on my computer and ever listened to what I used to put out. But knowing what I know now is like, I used to just try and thrive on being the smartest person in the room. Oh my God, this fact and this fact and this fact. Cool. It's okay to go into your brain and have that little dictionary in there and that little encyclopedia that tells you these facts, but you don't have to sound smart. You're allowed to just speak. And sometimes I was like, just trying to shoot facts instead of just letting my personality and my opinion come through on a lot of that earlier stuff, or like trying to fit the mold of what a wrestling podcaster should be instead of just being, again, it sounds really cheesy, but just being yourself. And just, I've learned if there's anything I could kind of, not that anyone really ever asked for my advice on anything, but just let your personality guide your content instead of worrying about the content is important. Like what you've got in the little box is important, but just let your personality shine. And that's the only way you can really be different from everybody talking about the same thing. You know what I mean?
I agree totally. So before we get into your work with Love Wrestling and how you joined them, you mentioned to me off camera that you did some work with Fightful and the great man that is Joel Pearl, one of the best podcasters out there, if I am allowed to say that. Do you agree?
Oh yeah. I never give Joel, me and Joel like to just banter like crazy on the internet, so I never give Joel compliments on camera. But I will today. Joel Pearl is one of the just greatest wrestling minds in terms of content creation. Like that man just knows what he's doing. So give him his flowers.
Definitely, I agree with you. So with him being one of the best podcasters out there, in our opinion, when you was working with him, what is some things you learned, etc., etc.?
Oh my goodness. Again, I think he's not so much giving you, like, he's not sitting you down and being like, this is my advice. Sometimes it's just watching him do his thing he's really good. I think the thing I take away most from Joel was he's really good with timing of things. He knows when to steer a conversation, when to kind of let it just fluster out. Like, I feel like a lot of, I think the biggest problem with just any kind of podcast or any kind of wrestling or anything, it doesn't even have to be wrestling, is like staying too much on one topic and just hoping to pull something out of it. Sometimes he's just really good of knowing when to move on. I don't even know if he's consciously doing that, but he just is really good at that. And that's something I looked from afar and went, oh, that's how you do that. That's how you be a better host.
What about, and I don't want to crap on the guy, but what is something that he did when you was working together that you're like, I'm not going to take that with me. You do you, but that's something you do that I'm maybe your skill set didn't fit, etc.
Yeah, I think for me personally is that sometimes with my content, aside from the legacy of when if I'm talking on a podcast or if I'm doing Twitch stuff, I'm always looking for the best way to get a laugh. Why Joel has a laugh and stuff like that. He knows where the line is of where you kind of need to be serious and where you need to be not. And he's really good at the serious stuff. I'm okay at it, but I always am looking for the laugh. So I guess with me, it's just like, how can I get this punchline in instead of just, doing the other stuff?
I know what you mean totally there. So obviously, before we get into your love wrestling, which we will get into, I promise. I'm just pinging questions at the minute. It's just how my brain works. It's like, obviously, you talk about working with Fightful and Love Wrestling and stuff. So who in wrestling media is on your bucket list that you're like, oh, I'd love to do a show with them, etc. Put it out into the universe.
Oh my God. I don't even know where the list would start, to be completely honest. I have been very grateful to kind of check off a lot of people. I think when I started appeared on a show with Ella J, I think Ella's one of the nicest women that there is, and I love Ella so much. The fact that I'm able to do stuff with Joel Pearl, the fact that I've been able to be in a kind of watch along scenario with people like Jeremy Lambert and just, people like that is just cool. So I know this again is going to sound like a cop-out answer, but I'm so down to do something with everybody. I'm just very personable like that. I want to do more and stuff like that. And as people come in and out of this kind of stuff, I really am very fascinated with people that haven't done a lot of wrestling content or just content creation in general. I like when people are kind of like that raw kind of I like when people make mistakes and stuff like that. I think it's very organic. So people that haven't got a lot of experience, I always gravitate towards.
I know what you mean totally there. So when you talked about that, so finally we will get into it. And for people waiting for this, I do apologize. So how do you join Love Wrestling? How do you start your show, etc., etc.?
So, I'm horrible with timelines and stuff like that, but me and Spencer Love had a chat around about 6 or 7 months before Love Wrestling had started, or I even knew about Love Wrestling at all. Obviously, Spencer, you've had him on this show. He's talked about the kind of origins of Love Wrestling and everything like that. We just had a chat on one of my shows. I was a fan of Spencer's from afar, and I was like, hey, I want to talk to you and just like this kind of show, just kind of get to know Spencer and stuff like that. And me and Spencer had a chat, and then that's when I thought it was the end of it. I was like, cool, he was a cool dude. It was a cool piece of content. I'll move on. About a month later, Spencer reached out to me and he was like, hey, I want to jump in a Zoom call with you. I have something to talk to you about. And I was like, okay. And he said he had this idea for a wrestling content creation site, like a YouTube, a Twitch, stuff like that. And he said he wanted me a part of it. And I was like, oh, okay. At that point, I had just finished my podcast run. My podcast was coming to an end in 2020. And I was like, I'm kind of done. I'm just going to focus on Twitch streaming. And that's kind of all I'm doing. And I was like, I'm sorry, Spence, but I've just kind of ended my show. And he's like, no, I want you to do something. I don't necessarily have a plan for what I want you to do. I just want you to contribute in some way. Think of it. If you can think of an idea, I want you a part of the starting group of Love Wrestling. And I was like, okay. So I sat on it for a while. And originally the plan when the site first started was to do a watch along style show. We're just going to pick random matches from the calendar of wrestling and just I would have a different guest on all the time and we would watch wrestling. That's when the network was becoming Peacock in the States, and then the network was changing here, and it just got too messy. And I was like, there's weird time codes. Some people don't have access to this, where some people do. So I kind of had to stop. And I was like, I'm sorry, Spence, but I'm out of an idea. And he was like, take your time, think of something and see what you can do. And that's when the kind of brainchild for the Legacy of started. So I've done 4 seasons now. Basically it's a focus on women's wrestling, but it's not always on women. Like I've done a legacy of ECW, I've done a legacy of TNA, I've done a legacy of Edge. I've done other things inside the wrestling world, but for the majority of it, I think there's over 60 episodes now, where I've focused on different women throughout different eras of wrestling, whether you like, you know, wrestling in the 90s, whether you like wrestling in the 2000s, the wrestling of today. I've done women that have kind of covered every kind of era that you can imagine, and just different kind of things. Like I've done special episodes and stuff like that. They're like 10 to 20 minute episodes that is fact mixed with opinion, and it's just like a really interesting way to like learn about talent and learn about what these women have done throughout their tenures to impact their legacy and impact the industry. And I think it's a really good way for fans that maybe don't know a lot about people to kind of, in a very short attention span world that we live in, is not overly long. You don't have to sit there for 2 hours and listen to a whole documentary of their timeline, but it's just like a 10 to 20 minute thing just to kind of soak it all in and be like, I like this person, I don't like this person, this is what they did. It's kind of, yeah, it's like that. It's fun. It's probably, I talk about personality and stuff like that, where I do show my personality. It's the one thing that I do in content world that I've ever done where it's not focused on looking for a laugh or anything like that. It's just facts mixed with a little bit of opinion, and then you can just kind of digest the information as you see fit.
That's very cool. So we talked about your wrestling media bucket list there. How does it work? Like, when you are looking to record these shows, are you putting them together and then just going to Spencer, right, here's the next episode of the Legacy of, or is he saying to you, I want you to do an episode on this time, etc., etc.? How does it work?
So Spencer has one of the best things about Spencer is that he's given me free reign to do whatever I want to do. There has been times where I've gone to different people and be like, hey, I've done a bunch of these episodes. What do you guys want? But it is 100% all me. I record it, I edit it, I upload it, I do everything. Spencer doesn't touch anything other than the post that promotes it on Love Wrestling. So he's given me free reign just to do what I want to do, which is really cool because that doesn't always happen. Some people want certain things, and I'm not a person that does very well when I can work within boundaries and stuff like that. But if I'm just flat out being told this is what you have to do, 9 times out of 10, I won't hit a home run because I'm not in it. I need to feel a certain way to do the episodes that I do. And there's a reason I was pumping out episodes like crazy when I first did them, but there's a reason I do them in blocks in seasons now and do like 8 or 9 episode runs, is because when I do something, I do it to its fullest, and I like to give it all my attention. So it takes me a little bit to actually record these and get these all done. But I like to think that I put out a pretty good piece of content. So, and it's something that I still feel flies under the radar a little bit. There's so much wrestling content. It's always going to be the work that I'm most proud of, but Spencer gives me free reign to do whatever the hell I want to do.
So you did talk about there why you put it in season blocks and stuff like that, which I think is very cool. So how do you you talked about how you avoid burnout earlier in this conversation with wrestling. How do you avoid burnout as a content creator, whether it be Twitch streaming, etc., etc., the Legacy of, etc.?
It's hard. It's not an easy thing to do. Some people think content creation is really easy. You just speak into a microphone or you just play a game and that's it. It's like, no, there's so much energy. Like sometimes I have to prepare myself to be able to do a 2 or 3 hour Twitch stream because
that's going to be my next question, by the way. Yeah. That's going to be my next question. How do you prepare?
You have to put so much energy on it. You have to be on. Well, at least I like to think I have to be at a certain level to be able to present myself the way that I want to be presented, not just how people are consuming me, but what I feel comfortable with putting out into the world. So I'm always very much like that. It's not the easiest thing. Burnout is a very real thing. I take breaks quite often. There's sometimes times where I just post a little something on Twitter, say, I'm gone for a couple of weeks. I just need to just sit on my couch and not worry about anything but sitting on my couch. You know what I mean? And just living my life. And I think that's necessary. Hey, it's not for everybody. Some people like to be constantly going, like as much as they can. I cannot do that. Like I stream 3 to 4 times a week for a reason, because sometimes I just need those days where I'm like, I'm not even going to turn my computer on. I just want to sit on my couch. I want to do things for myself, hang out with my cat or something like that. So I burnout is really real. I don't really necessarily have an answer other than I just like to take breaks sometimes.
No, I fully understand what you're saying there. So if, like, hypothetically, you did become burned out completely with content creating, would you have to step away and say to Spencer, look, I can't do this anymore? Or because of the opportunities he's given you, would you feel guilty is not the right word, but I know what I'm trying to say?
No, guilty is a very big word because he's given me such a platform to be able to grow.
Exactly.
So yes, there would be a conversation I'd have with myself and with Spencer. But to be completely honest, Spencer is very good with that kind of stuff. Like, hey, when I come to him and presented the idea of like, hey, I need to do this in season blocks because I'm getting really tired with myself. That point, I just started a new job and it's a very intense job. So it was taking a lot of my time and energy away, where sometimes at the end of a 12-hour shift, I just want to get home and eat food and then just lay in bed and just kind of rest. So Spencer's been really good with that. I have gone to Spencer before and said, I can't do anything for a month. I'm very sorry. And Spencer has 100% always been really good with just allowing me to do so. He says, my place is always my place in Love Wrestling, whether I post every week or whether I post once a year. Spencer's been really, really good with that. And I would like to get back to a place with Spence where I'm a little bit more consistent. So I'm currently on a break now from doing the Legacy of. We just finished out a season a couple of weeks ago.
I'll be totally honest, by the time this goes out, you might have aired another season or started to air.
Well, yeah, I probably will start to work on it by the time that this airs. But it will be later in the year anyway. So it is, yeah, it's Spencer's been really good, but there has been so many times where I've just thought, oh my goodness, I don't know if I can keep doing this at this level forever because I'm burning myself out. And when you burn yourself out with content, you start to lose a little bit of the reason why you kind of started to do it.
For lack of a better word.
And then if you lose that, you kind of lose. It just becomes a chore instead of something you want to do. So I think to maintain that, you have to, well, for me, I have to take breaks and I have to be honest with the people I'm working with to be like, I can't keep this up because I'm going to lose it.
I understand what you mean completely. So we've talked about your journey as a content creator. We've talked about your wrestling fandom. But as we wrap this up, Josh, we're going to do a quick segment that I call generic questions. Those of you that have seen my interviews before will know this is where I ask my guests the questions they might get asked on social media, such as their favorite match, favorite wrestlers, favorite pay-per-view, favorite wrestlers theme, favorite tag team, and favorite wrestler. Basically, questions that Josh might get asked on social media quite regularly. So now he'll have a place to be like, look, I've answered this. Please go watch this. So what's your favorite match of all time?
Favorite match of all time is Sasha Banks and Bayley at TakeOver Brooklyn in 2015. That will always be my favorite match. I love it so much. It's the reason why I love professional wrestling.
Fair enough. So just for the content's sake, do you want to elaborate a little bit more?
Yeah, that was the first. I think that match is something that I knew women could always deliver. And that was like the ultimate seal of like my brain going, finally, something to actually visualize what I feel like it could have been done a long time ago. It's still a match that I just think there's no such thing as a perfect wrestling match, but that to me is as close as you'll get.
I shouldn't say I agree because this is your answer to the generic questions, but I agree. What about your favorite overall pay-per-view card of all time?
Oh, I'm tied between two. I think WrestleMania 20. I think WrestleMania 24.
Ooh, fair enough. Once again, for the content's sake, elaborate, please.
It has Ric Flair and Shawn Michaels on it. It has Edge and The Undertaker on it. It has one of the coolest Money in the Bank ladder matches on it where CM Punk won his first Money in the Bank.
Yeah. That was his first
Yeah, it's like, and the visual set of WrestleMania 24 is really cool. It's in the Citrus Bowl in Miami. It's an open air stadium. It starts light, ends dark. I just think it's a cool visual look, and I've always loved that show.
I agree. I think that's a fun show. What about your favorite wrestler's entrance theme?
Oh, Christians, but like the 2005, like Just Close Your Eyes. It was the lady singing from Waterproof Blonde.
Yeah.
That is a great theme.
Very nice.
Mm.
And then as we your favorite tag team of all time. Yes, you can have two.
No. I always go to hesitate when I answer this because a lot of people come at me, but the Bella Twins.
Okay. But once again, for the content's sake, please elaborate.
The Bella Twins are two women that are very polarizing. They get a lot of hate. They get a lot of love too, but they do get a lot of hate. But when I think of women in the industry, I think they changed a lot more than people give them credit for.
Fair dues. What about your favorite wrestler?
Ever would be, I always think back when I was a kid of who I loved, and it will always probably be Rob Van Dam.
Ooh, fair enough. Once again, for the content's sake, please elaborate.
It was just the coolest dude. He really was. As a kid, he did great. He was just like flashy and fun. He was no nonsense. He just kind of had a good time. And that's what you wanted, especially as a child. Like him and Chris Jericho are always two wrestlers that I look at that time, and they just made me feel a certain way.
Fair enough. So as we wrap this up, Josh, the question I end all my interviews on, I believe with YouTube, with content creation in general, we're all sort of going to live forever in some sort of very, very strange way. So what is one piece of content you're like, I want to be remembered for that? And then what is one that you're like, yuck, get rid of that from your brain, etc.?
Oh man, I think the list of stuff that I'd like to get rid of is very large. But the first like year of stuff that I did podcast wise is just, to me, it's the cringiest stuff ever, because it's just like, what was I doing? My equipment wasn't right. Production side of things, I wasn't editing anything. I was just going on weird tangents about weird things that you just don't need to go on tangents about. I didn't know what I was doing. So again, a very just bit of a cop-out answer, but just anything from that first year you could pick out of and just delete that from the internet. I still have it up on my channels, but like, oh, let's not even go there. But the thing I'm probably most proud of, to be completely honest, it's probably the only piece of content that I've ever really done that isn't like content per se, but I came out because of having a voice on wrestling media and stuff like that. So I think without my platform that I had grown to that point, I don't think I would have ever had the confidence to do it. So I'll always probably be most proud of that, not to get too corny.
That's very cool. So as we wrap this up, Josh, where can the good people find you and your content?
So you can pretty much find me pretty much everywhere now, I think, at Josh Robinson _00. I'm most active on Twitter and on TikTok, and then of course on Twitch. But you can kind of find me there. And I'm just having a good time. I'm always trying to be as happy and fun as possible. And just, again, as long as I make someone laugh, I'm good. I like to have a laugh. Laughter is a great, powerful thing. So I think we need to laugh more.
I agree. Like I said at the beginning of this chat, one of the most positive people in wrestling media, one of the nicest humans in wrestling media as well. So if you guys like this video, make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Tom Talks Irish on YouTube. Follow me on Twitter at Tom Talks Irish, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye now.